Um, Before I begin, this morning when I was getting dressed, I was really struck by what I was going to present to you. And let me back up here so you can see my jeans that I use in my studio all the time. Can you get an idea of what these are like? I've been wiping my hands on these for the last year. That to me is the unconscious. That's the world that we often don't get to dip into. What we see is this. And what is actually going on is that. And that's the world that I'm lucky enough to live in a lot of the time. And story and image are an important part of it. So I want to begin with Ivy, can we let me set a quick timer. Is that okay? Let me just do this. Okay, good. In 2019, I had an exhibition called The Dream Life of Objects. And part of that exhibition was that I asked people to write stories about objects that had helped dream them, objects that they had carried through their life. The 600 stories were astounding. And at some point, I'll do a podcast to share those stories because they are so poignant. And most of these people were not artists, they were not writers. Every story needs no editing at all. That's how pure the response was. They distill things to an essence. And so I thought about the power of story to weave us together. And I wondered, what kind of vessel might each person imagine to hold their stories? And what other stories would grow out of that vessel? So I asked friends, what vessel would hold your stories? This question is so basic, yet oddly poetic, that everyone responded as though they had thought about this before. The answer came immediately. One friend who grew up in India said, my cupped hands. What a great vessel, what an amazing vessel. And we each have that vessel, we carry it with us. Another who grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm said, an empty hay cart. One of my grandchildren in his 20s answered, surprisingly, an old suitcase. A filmmaker friend said, a feather. What an amazing concept of a vessel. So vessels take many forms. An umbilical cord is a vessel that brings nutrients to the fetus while also removing waste. It serves both purposes. A book creates a world into which we metaphorically step. A box we can open, we have a favorite glass we can drink from, a piece of paper on which we write our bodies. These are all vessels. So I would love to do an exercise for a moment or two in which you close your eyes and think about a vessel that would hold your stories and give birth to more stories. We'll spend a moment quietly and imagine that vessel. I wish we had the time to share what everybody has imagined. If you have paper and pencil with you, you could quickly write down something or do a quick drawing. I think when Susan and Ivy are talking about the brain-body relationship, the emotions, and the doors that can open, that this is a pathway. Can you feel what it's like to sit and imagine that vessel? and imagine the stories that can come from it. I think that's a demonstration of some of the things that you're talking about on a very everyday level of the magic of what image and story can do. The vessel has been a part of my work for the past 50 years. My vessel has always been a womb shape. It's the shape of a womb, whether I'm working in glass or fiber or drawing or painting. That vessel has stayed for 50 years. As well as the canvases, they have been a vessel to hold. As an artist, well, basically, images flow through our thoughts every day. They flow through our dreams every night. Images float out of us and into us. They wait for us, and sometimes they even ambush us. As an artist, I am responsible to images to give them form, to give them life. When I shirk my responsibilities, the image is lost. A breath is not made visible. When I catch the image by photographing, by writing, by painting, by working with fiber, glass, and clay, I have begun to pay proper homage to the gift of a possibly transformative image. Imagine, we talked about despair and hope. Imagine if we could pluck the stars, lay them in their pattern on the earth, draw lines between them to weave our stories together, to weave us together. We could peer through the thinness of the membranes we construct that separate cultures, science, art, and spirituality. We can see those membranes clearly enough to dissolve them, to encourage the dance beckoned by the image, the path made by the dancer who experiences the healing gift of the image. We could draw a new mappa mundi based on a universal language that connects the dots to weave a web of compassion. That universal language is art in its fullest sense, the art that lives in each of us, our individual genius. Years ago in Healdsburg in Northern California in Sonoma County, I ran programs and participated in programs where we combined the arts with all the other disciplines. So kids in chemistry, we would pick vines and bring them in, and then through a process of burning in a test tube, what's it called? Something distillation, we would turn it into vine charcoal. And then these science students would work with the vine charcoal and create the smoke and the experience of that. We did this, we brought in artists who worked with all the different teachers, and it was so rich. And I'll bet you every child who participated, and we went from elementary all the way through high school, every child who participated in that remembers those exercises with great joy and glee. Whether they became scientists or visual artists or musicians, it went into their body in a different way. And when Ivy and Susan speak about that, that was an experience of it. Unfortunately, and I have the images that some of these, one artist asked the children they gave them an ice cube. This was in a physics class. And they were to depict the ice cube melting using watercolors. I cannot tell you how magnificent these paintings are. So there's an actual experience. I mean, that art is, you don't have to keep the art separate. Just like each one of us has that gift. I have to live it every minute. That was my particular path in life, but we all have it in so many ways. And to see these children tap into that part of themselves, how do we help them hold that the rest of their life? Education does have to change dramatically. I mean, imagine if a teacher started a day with a piece of clay in each child's hand, not plasticine, not clay, something that has evolved from a rock over millions and millions of years. held in just a little Ziploc in their desk. And for 20 minutes, the child played with that clay. Just 20 minutes. They'd have a different child on their hand for the entire day. Somehow in our societies, we think of art versus things, and it's not versus, it's part of. In the book, Your Brain on Art, Ivy and Susan feature a particular painting that I did back in 1987. And I'm going to show you the final piece of that painting. This is the final painting. It's and that painting only exists in photographs. It is a 6x4 foot painting that I worked on. And I knew when I began that the painting was going to be read when I was finished, and that nothing that I painted on that canvas was going to exist except as a memory, except as a way of seeing what my own process was. I was teaching myself how to paint at that point. I didn't study art in school. I was an English major, medieval English literature. Oh, heaven, medieval Chaucer. Talk about story and image, magnificent. This is where I started the painting. And there were 100 paintings under this final red color. I had said to Lee that I was a tapestry weaver at one point, and you said, I can see that. And everything I do has to do with weaving, I think, because there was a point when I started doing tapestry weaving, I was already 29. I already had 3 of my 4 children, and I was living in Edinburgh. And suddenly the world made some sense to me. Oh, it's a woven structure. I get it. And what a complex woven structure. And that's what we're talking about. If you think of the brain as an incredible loom, what a magnificent woven structure we can create. So I'm just going to show you a few of the images that came up as I was exploring. Now, this is out of approximately 102 images. There was a doorway that I found, and I thought I was in a perfectly safe world, and it turned into quite a different experience. And yet, in that, I found this figure again. I call him fallen from the stars. Eventually, after many transformations, he disappeared, and this is what appeared. And I thought I was done, but I wasn't. It started up again and eventually became these figures. This painting was so hard to paint over, so difficult. It was very powerful at 6x4 feet. It held so much of what I had been looking for. I painted over it. And I learned, and it became this eventually. And then the final red painting. And what I learned from this experience, and I think it changed the whole way that I saw, was that I could let go. I could dislike a painting. It didn't matter. I could love it. What I would do when I hated a painting, and this painting is in Ivy and Susan's book, some of the images, more of the images from it. If I loved a painting, I would sit with it for 3 days, and then I was ready to let it go. If I hated the chaos, the confusion in another painting, I would sit with it for 3 days. And then I could see where I could enter it in love and continue. It was such a powerful experience. I would recommend this to anybody to do a painting like this. And it was only for me. I had done a white one in 1985, a black one in 1986, and then the red one in 1987. Thank you. It was an amazing process, just remarkable. I return to these even now, so many years later, to learn from them. And my work is very different now. what I didn't know is that at some point my palette would reduce itself to black, red, and white for 25 years. Again, and I wanted to work in color, but I think about your work, Ivy and Susan, that this exploration, those colors did something to my entire sense of life. Working with those three colors, that's limited a palette. It was so powerful. So what I want to say is, I have 3 more minutes, I see, and that our first, if we think about the first thing that we know in this life, it's the heartbeat of our mother while we're still in the womb. And I believe we tune ourselves to that. The second thing that we know in life is not light. I've always thought of it as light. It's touch, being held, and that's texture. And if you think of what texture is and the word text, and you think of language, you think of weaving, the word text and the word texture come from the same source, texere, which means to weave. And this life, I think, is about weaving our stories together, weaving disciplines together, weaving all of us together. I had an image once that anytime that there's a war in this world, that everybody, the war has to stop every day at 5 o'clock around the globe. And everybody has to work with an image that they have experienced that day. That somehow we have to find a way to get through that kind of thing where people feel connected rather than divided. And whether the image is the sound of a bird, whether it's a piece of earth that you pick up, whatever it is, just the magic of what image and story and art can create. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. I feel like